Hello and a warm welcome to the observatory. As you can see, the winter weather has well and truly arrived, along with another lockdown in England. I've had two observing sessions in January, both with a bright moon in the sky and lots of drifting cloud. And I think back to this time last year, I was preparing to go to the winter star party under those warm tropical skies. I first went here in 2014 and really enjoyed it. This is my fourth visit to Florida for the winter star party. It's great fun, both to have some winter sunshine under the palm trees and to do some amazing astronomy with a great bunch of people. My wife dropped me off at Heathrow and I flew from London to Miami, watching movies and sipping gin and tonics all the way. Picked up a hire car and drove the 3 hours or so to Scout Key, one of the islands making up the Florida Keys. And being under those warm sunshine made the grey skies of England seem a long way away. The site is at 24 degrees north, so it takes a while to get used to the sky. You get to see the far southern Milky Way, Orion and Sirius are high in the sky, the pole star is low over the trees. Objects you cannot see from England, such as Edmonton's Dori, Eta Carinae, the Southern Cross, all visible. And I have to turn to new pages in my star atlas, the pages I haven't used before. So I put my tripod and camping gear in a suitcase in the hold of the aircraft. I bring my lightweight camping setup, this small two-person tent, and I also brought my 100mm APM binoculars in my hand luggage, along with a camera, eyepieces, sketching kit, star charts. I was very fortunate on this trip, as on an earlier visit I've met and stayed in contact with another observer, Jim Pickering, who has a 22-inch dobsonian, but had since upgraded to an even bigger 28-inch. So he actually lent me his 22-inch, the smaller telescope, and the ladder you need to get to the eyepiece. Wonderful optics, southern skies, good company, what more could you want? The other good thing about the winter star party, the daily talks and the trade stands. You get high-end gear and also the small useful stuff you inevitably need or want. And you get to walk around and see other people's setups, like this 10-inch Apo refractor. I think it was retailing for $65,000 including the mount. And these amazingly simple binocular telescope on a simple wooden setup. Really great views of the Orion Nebula and Pleiades through the eyepieces. So this is us getting ready for a night's observing. The sun is setting in the west on the other side of the pole, and in the distance behind the row of cars is an osprey nest. I'm setting up my 4-inch APM binoculars and eyepiece pairs. The 28-inch Jim's telescope is the white telescope to the right. And there was also an exquisite 12-inch f8 planetary telescope on a homemade mounting. Really stunning views. My 22-inch telescope, the telescope I'm borrowing from Jim, is the wooden telescope nearer the telegraph pole. I'll quickly interrupt the video to talk about why I find the southerly location of the winter star party so exciting. Back home I'm in England at 51 degrees north, but here we're at 24 degrees north. So back home, a lot of the northern sky is really high, and yet there are whole sweeps of the southern sky we simply don't get to see. Using Sky Safari with the grid displayed, you can see that Orion and Sirius are pretty low to the horizon. The Orion Nebula is at 36 degrees above the horizon, for example. If we magically relocate to Key West, the nearest town to the winter star party, suddenly whole regions of the sky become visible. Orion, the Orion Nebula, is now a whopping 60 degrees high. And the interesting Milky Way regions around Puppis, that we simply don't get to see from England, are now well positioned. Lots of really interesting clusters in this part of the sky. Later in the night, we have Centaurus and Carina on the meridian. This brings the huge globular cluster, Omega Centauri, and the sprawling nebula, Eta Carinae, into view. Again, there are so many wonderful clusters in this part of the sky too. And of course, in the morning, we see the whole of Scorpius and Sagittarius as they rise, rather than having them cut off by the horizon. So with darkness falling, it's time to get observing. And here's a highlights reel of the week's observing log. With such a big telescope, I wanted to explore some new deep sky objects. That being said, I started each evening with my favourite friend, the Orion Nebula, and used that to align the telescope's push-to system. The Orion Nebula is a wonderful sight in any telescope, but it's a stupendous sight in such a big telescope. It was then a quick swing over to Comet Pan-STARRS again at dusk with the snappy name C2017T2. It was near the double cluster in Perseus, which was quickly setting into the sunset. A small fan-shaped object, just see it in the binoculars against the sort of dark blue sky at 9th magnitude, but an easy sight in the big telescope. After looking at the Rhine Nebula, I also found this interesting object, NGC 1999. It's a small reflection nebula in Orion, small triangular-shaped nebulosity, looks a bit like the Space Shuttle, reflecting the light from the bright star at the apex, V380 Orionis. The dark void at the centre really is a dark void, it's not a clump of obscuring dust. Of course, this is also a good time of year to explore the spring galaxies. These galaxies are the antenna galaxies down in Corvus at 11th magnitude. Physically colliding, hence they are distorted into these unusual shapes as they merge together. To my eye, it forms this R0, or the number 10 shape, which is how the slightly more capable and slightly more expensive Hubble telescope sees it too. Of course, with such a big telescope, I simply had to explore the bright galaxies as well, and what appears to be a smudge in my binoculars takes on these wonderful details. This is M83, nicknamed the Southern Pinwheel. It's quite low from back home, I've only seen it a handful of times, but with a big scope and high in the sky, it was easy to see the spiral arms and some clumping material as well. Of course, moving even further south is the famous galaxy Centaurus A. This has a dark dust lane running through the core that makes it look like a hamburger. And having seen two colliding galaxies earlier, this is also the result of another galactic collision, as shown in this image from the European Southern Observatory. I also found out on the Tuesday morning there was an occultation of Mars. As the Moon goes around the Earth, it periodically covers up stars, and in this case the planet Mars. As it was at dawn, I quickly covered up the telescope and used my binoculars, taking pictures through the eyepiece with my iPhone. I can remember being really tired, I was still jet lagged, and really struggled to function, but it was well worth it. As the Moon slowly crawled across, it got nearer and nearer to Mars, before taking a few seconds to cover the tiny disk. And after a long night of observing, it was then time for bed, before the sun got too high. I also used this approach to photograph Jupiter and its moons. Perhaps this is a worthwhile project for those starting out in planetary observing. Of course, one of the highlights of being further south is seeing objects that are impossible to see from back home. And I love this view of Eta Carinae. This is a supermassive star that's in the process of blasting out layers of its atmosphere before it goes supernova. It's quite low down on the horizon even from Florida, so it's not always visible if there's cloud low down. But I had a blast last time in 2017, observing over several nights and putting together this sketch with my binoculars. Like on my earlier trip, I simply carried my binoculars up to the tree line, enjoyed looking at this sight over the sea. During the daytime, it was a short walk through the campsite to the jetty. This meant we could swim in the day, which for my fellow UK observers, swimming outside of the February star party may take a while to sink in. It was great fun to have a dip in the afternoon, and during the night I set my camera up on its tripod and enjoyed the Milky Way transiting past. That's Sirius at the top high up, and the Southern Star Canopus nearer the horizon. Unfortunately, there's a road nearby that was lighting up the jetty, and a few boats and planes are going past, including this brightly lit Coast Guard patrol boat. Near my tent was a tree a few yards from the sea, and was a favourite spot of the resident's osprey when it was passing through. It also made a great foreground for watching the Milky Way rise in the small hours of the morning. When I first went to WSP in 2014, I had seen what I thought was clouds coming in early in the morning over the sea. Well, someone nearby had said, "No, that's not clouds, that's the Milky Way rising." And of course with the camera you get to see these wonderful dust lanes and nebulosity, the same stuff we've been seeing in other galaxies just a bit closer. Sweeping this area in the 100mm binoculars was wonderful. The Lagoon Nebula, Triffids Nebula, False Comet were all easily visible, and this is a sketch of the False Comet from one of my earlier visits. Such a shame it's not visible from the UK. Alas, it was not long before the sun rose and washed the stars away. And after a week I was on my way back home, driving back on the motorway in the rain. Luckily I have my camera and notebook full of memories that I hope you've enjoyed. Let's hope that we can start travelling again soon and get ourselves back under some dark and clear skies.